One rule that I've always followed is be where the action is. Beerud Sheth, the co founder of Gupshup, tells me as we look back at his entrepreneurial journey in this podcast. It is then no wonder that the pace of the growth at Gupshup, a Twitter like community site that enabled users to join groups of their interest and get updates through SMS, short message service on mobile, was outstanding. 70 million users in over 3 years since its launch in April 2007. In fact, they had massively outpaced Facebook, which then reportedly had over 8 million users in India. Even when combined with Twitter, it was no match for SMS Gupshup, as the company was called then. The idea was this: when a person would send a message, SMS Gupshup would send it to all its followers, even if there were 10,000 of them. While the growth was high, the burn was pretty high too. As the company bloated, so did the cost of subsidizing all messages. By 2011, panicking had started kicking in. To avert an imminent death, SMS Gupshup made a B2B pivot. The name changed to Gupshup, and the platform was now for enterprise messaging, which means that businesses could build conversational experiences across marketing, sales, and support system and send messages to consumers such as OTPs, balance checks, payment confirmation, sales support, booking confirmations, delivery messages, and discount information. In a deep dive conversation with Beerud, I tried to get inside his mind on how he is thinking on building out the conversation messaging empire, which he defines as one where there's an ability for a consumer to chat with business as easily as chatting with a friend. I begin the conversation asking the founder of the freshly minted unicorn on his early days at the Wall Street when the internet was just booming. Welcome to this show, and thank you so much for putting your time and energy to this. My first question to you really is that let's begin from the beginning. You know, when IIT Bombay happened, then MIT happened, then you were a trader at Wall Street, and then you co-founded this company called Elance before Gupshup. So how this entire thing came together, and I think if I were to sort of put this together in perspective, you were the first guys who actually got the taste of the internet boom, right? When Amazon and Google were really making a noise and did not really want to miss out on the internet boom. So how was
Yeah, that's
that time frame when you remember that vis-a-vis what you're seeing right now?
sure. Absolutely. Well, firstly, thanks for having me here. Really excited to be here and have this discussion. Yeah, you're right. I mean, look, I was at IIT. I think graduated in the early '90s, and I got to MIT. Now, many of your younger audiences may not know what it was like, but mid '90s is when the web really was getting born. And at MIT, in fact, we were working on a lot of these advanced technologies that later became commonplace, right? But there was a time where people did not know what the web meant, what the internet, what a browser meant, what a website meant, and so on, right? So a lot of these things that we take for granted now didn't exist at that time. And so when I graduated, I mean, this was still the early days of the web, and I wanted to also get some business experience because I'd studied computer science and technology, both at IIT and MIT. So I really wanted to get some business experience. I ended up on Wall Street, but while I was there, the internet happened, meaning, Netscape came out and sort of did an IPO. Amazon sort of did the same thing. eBay, Yahoo, right? Plenty of companies. Google was not yet born yet, for example. So a lot of this was happening, and I'd studied technology. I had had some business experience, and I was like, and this is too exciting. I can't be left out of this, right? I mean, when I'm on my deathbed looking back, and when people ask me, what were you doing when the internet, such exciting things were happening? I couldn't have been saying, oh, I was just sort of, doing a high paid job, right? I mean, you got to, there's a bigger purpose, if you will. And you got to be where the action is. I think that's the one advice, for example, that or one rule that I've always held, which is sometimes people confuse short-term salary or short-term gains versus sort of really the learning that comes out of being in the thick of the action. So anyway, so I think that's where we said, okay, I think the internet is happening, where are the opportunities? And that's where we came up with Elance. Me and a couple of my classmates from IIT really started that. I was in New York and so on. And even Elance was the culmination of really my life's experience because, coming from India, I knew that there were talented people in India and around the world, right? And then coming from a computer science background, you knew what the power of the internet was to connect people. And then coming from Wall Street, I kind of knew that you could create these marketplaces. So if you take these three ideas, we ended up with a global marketplace for services.
Yeah, and that sort of took shape. And then how did the SMS Gupshup idea was born? And
Oh,
it really began as a Twitter-like messaging platform, very consumer-facing initially, and
right.
absolutely different from the avatar that we see it right now. So what was the
That's
genesis of the idea then, and what were you really thinking in your mind? And those, mind you, were really the early days of internet adoption.
Well, okay. So when I was at Elance for about 8 or 9 years, and then it's a longer story, but it had its own pivot and so on. And then I wanted to, sort of get on and start something new. Now that's when the mobile revolution was happening, right? So I mean, one thing to remember is all ideas are always contextual. There's a point in time where an idea makes sense, and I think that was the story, right? So in the late 90s, when I started Elance, I mean that sort of made a lot of sense. And then when you think about 2005 or six or so on, the mobile revolution was maybe the most exciting thing.
That's well
And
said, that all ideas are contextual. You have to look at everything in the context of time and space, and I totally agree with that. Yes.
right, exactly, because you can't, certain things are not possible until like the ecosystem is ready for it. So with the mobile revolution, you had billions of people coming on to digital connectivity for the very first time. Now these were early days, right? So you had feature phones in most parts of the world, so the only thing you could do was voice and SMS, right? And that's where we sort of saw the power of SMS as the way to reach billions of people. So if you want to build any information or content service, you could only send it through SMS. And then, so we built a consumer service, sort of a publish and subscribe model where a publisher could publish interesting information and their followers could follow it. Now it was almost exactly the same idea as Twitter at about the same time, except that Twitter, because it was born in the West, became a web product while Gupshup remained an SMS product. But that's how sort of that idea came about. Yeah.
But tell me also one thing, Beerud. I think one of the interesting things that happened with you was that you had about 70 million users in 2010, right? Which is in a very short span of time. You had perhaps also outpaced Facebook, which just had about 8 million users in India then. So do you think that, this kind of supernatural growth, if you will, in this kind of time frame, if what you look at it, it would be labeled as supernatural growth during that point of time? What really happened? Of course, one was that it was contextual, mobile revolution was taking place and you leveraged that. But what really were you doing so correct that you reached 70 million users so quickly?
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's really hard to get these explosive growth phenomena, right? So I think the product design itself was such that the publishers themselves were motivated to find followers, so there would be word of mouth, and then those followers would also follow other publishers and then tell their friends to also follow, right? So anyway, the word of mouth was just insanely strong. And at that time it was all kinds of things. There were things like jokes and shairi and motivational content. There were news updates, and there were college students. College students really loved it because they really wanted to reach out to lots of people. We created what are now known as the earliest influencers, right? There were many people they'd be very excited that they have like 1 lakh followers or 10 lakh followers and so on, right? So a lot of this, it's really just the social networking phenomena, right? But ours was the first and the biggest sort of phenomena in India. And that was, as we later found out, both a blessing and a curse, but yeah, that's how it grew explosively.
If I were to ask you that, you had all the traits of a large social media network, except that you were on messaging, you sort of restricted yourself to being an SMS service. Do you sort of regret that in hindsight? I mean, look at WhatsApp right now. It became such a habit forming product for all consumers worldwide. Facebook snapped WhatsApp at like what ridiculously low valuation, one could say, in the hindsight right now. I want to ask you that do you think that if you had the wherewithal then of too much capital available, which is right now, and had you not pivoted to the enterprise messaging, perhaps you could have been the WhatsApp then?
If I ever thought about if there, what if this and what if that, or ever carried regrets, I would never be able to live my life or plan or do anything, right? I think, look, living in Silicon Valley, as I do, everybody around here is kind of walking with a lottery ticket in their pocket, right? And someday or the other, somebody or the other is, their lottery ticket pops. And if you really worry too much about this, and I find this, by the way, so I mean, we hire a lot of young engineers, or young students out of the Indian education system, and there we are all hyper competitive, right? I got this score, my classmate got that score, or his salary is this much, I should get this much. When you get into the real world, and especially in the startup world, it's not a linear growth path, right? It's very non-linear. It's also very probabilistic, meaning very hit or miss, right? Today this lottery hits, tomorrow that, because there's an element of luck. Now it's not entirely luck. There's a lot of hard work and creativity as well. But I think it's sort of, and you can't predict all of these sort of shifts in the technical ecosystem, right? There's new technologies emerging, new players doing this, and so on and so forth. So I think, anyway, you're right. I think along the journey, right, there were many different paths that one could have taken, but you can't. You really, it's not a helpful attitude at all to think of, oh, it could have been this, it could have been that, right? Because there's nothing to complain about. I mean, today again, right, the company has a good value. We found another area and another space that has a lot of potential.
That's sort of well said, that there are no regrets and you can only know the path which is forward and perhaps not dwell so much time on the path which you already left, which is backwards. So tell me one thing, Beerud, that when this pivot happened to, okay, fine, that, the consumer space is perhaps there's too much cash burn attached to it. We are not necessarily ready. You've already missed the bus there. And you pivoted to the enterprise messaging platform services. What were the lessons learned there? And was that journey much more peaceful and smoother than what the consumer journey would have been?
uh, I think so. The lessons learned, at least what we did, for example, was say, okay, what's working, and we keep that. What's not working, and we have to change that, right? So what was working was we had this platform that could handle very high volumes of messaging, and could drive user engagement and communications and so on, and for like tens of millions of users, right? So that was working. That was the good part. What was not working in that context at that time was the business model, because we were subsidizing billions of messages, and we could not put advertising messages in there, right? So we changed it to an enterprise model by finding enterprises, like banks and e-commerce companies and airlines and so on, who could afford to pay for those messages to communicate with their customers. I think apart from that, other kinds of lessons are, look, anytime you change course like this, right, it's hard enough for one person in their head to change course, right? Because changing course implies that you have to acknowledge to yourself that what we did yesterday is not working, right? And sometimes as an entrepreneur, your identity is so closely tied to your company's success and identity, and nobody wants to admit failure and so on, right? But you have to be realistic, right? You can't live in fantasy land. You have to say, okay, this is the situation, this is where I am. You have to play the cards you're dealt with, right? You can't say, oh, I wish I had that card and I had that situation. So you really have to face the reality, and it's hard enough for one person to change. Now imagine you changing and then trying to convince 100 other people to also do the same, right? Your whole team has to move along, and that can also be really challenging and stressful, because everybody else is going through that process and they're looking at you, and you may be a little disappointed, which if they are disappointed, then it can become a huge problem. So it really is a huge lesson in leadership on how to carry the team even in a difficult situation. And by the way, if done well, it can be a great bonding experience, because the camaraderie that when you come through collective stress, those bonds and those trust relationships become much stronger going forward. And I think in our case, that's really what happened. A lot of people who've gone through some of these failures, if you will, right? And I don't think of them, they're sort of learning opportunities, right? You sort of fail forward rather, and those have been very, very formative experiences for us. Yeah.
So, how bad was it? You mentioned the word failure and perhaps tasting failure ahead of getting huge successes. How does that really feel when you've had this near death experience or that near failure experience and suddenly success comes in? I have spoken to so many entrepreneurs, and failure is very hard. It's hard to an extent that you are eating food and it doesn't taste anything anymore. It's like you stop watching your calendar because it is a ticking time bomb on your cash burn calendar. You don't want to do that another VC meeting. Your mind is, you're already talking to your mind all the time. You're already the speaker on your own chat show. Mentally, you're talking like people just become insane. It can be that hard to accept
So
failure.
um, I think it can be, but it should not be. And at least here's the way I've approached it. Right, you're right that I think it feels like your whole world is crashing, right? Because it's not just that you are going to struggle, but you also have responsibility for all your employees who might lose jobs, or all your investors who put money in you, and so on. And right, and really, you don't want to let anybody down, right? So I think it really, because the very trait that gets an entrepreneur to get started, which is hard to do to begin with, right? It takes a lot of a courage, conviction, confidence, and a can-do attitude to begin with in the first place. And then when you hit a point like this, it can be very challenging. But at the same time, I think if really caught up in some of those things that you were talking about, let's say you're depressed, or you're anxious, and your mind is racing in 100 different directions, and you can't focus, and you can't eat, and you can't sleep, and so on. Well, the consequence of that is that a bad situation will actually become worse, right? The way you're going to get out of a bad situation is actually the exact opposite, which is to really hunker down, put your best creativity, your healthiest mental state, a lot of physical energy, so you really need to be in the best shape in the worst situation to sort of come out of it, because that's the only way in which you'll be able to think clearly, to find some alternatives, to be able to project confidence, to take the team along, and so on. Right now, I'm not saying it's easy, and it's easier said than done, of course. But even if you just sort of logically say, look, whatever the situation is, I need to come out of it, right? So even if I feel bad about it, I have to push those feelings out to the side, saying they don't help. Anxiety doesn't help. Just, it only distracts. Or getting overly stressed, not sleeping, doesn't help. And I think, like I said, one of those things I've always believed is this. There's a poster out there which says, give me the courage to change the things I can, the patience to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So I think really, um, the one thing I would strongly advise is there's really no value in feeling bad about things outside your control. Like in our case, right, we had the 2001 dot-com bust, or the 2008 financial crisis, which was very difficult for many, many startups. Now, is there any value in feeling bad about it? I mean, it's sort of outside your control. It's happened. The only thing you can figure is how to adapt, right? So I think not worrying about that. And the other thing also is just not make it about your personal identity. And by the way, I would also encourage media and anybody else watching here, which is, I think you need to encourage entrepreneurs to try. And if it doesn't work out, or if they don't succeed, I think they still deserve an A for effort, right? I mean, it's sort of, because that's how great things happen, and you want more people trying it, even though there's huge, enormous chances of failure, right? So, or of not succeeding. And so I think it's important to really celebrate the fact that people are trying and doing it. So I think really you just have to keep perspective. And by the way, that perspective is on both sides. On the negative side, don't get too depressed. And on the positive side, which I'm sure we'll come and talk about the unicorn announcement, is you can't get too euphoric either, right? It's not like, oh, it's party and we've achieved, it's game over and so we are successful, we've arrived. I mean, that can be, a negative experience in the other direction as well. I think, these things happen, they are par for the course. I think it's these swings are very extreme. The lows are lower and the highs are higher, and you just got to stay balanced. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there were situations when you did not have perhaps enough money in the bank and you had to pivot. And then the Tiger Global funding happened. But I must say this, that you raised that funding 10 years later when you had persevered, when you had pivoted, and perhaps you were on the right trajectory. And how important was this fundraising for you? How critical was it?
I think I mean, we're super excited. It's great. It's going to help our business grow a lot. It's going to help us accelerate our vision, right? So in that sense, it's really critical for our future growth. But it's but as an entrepreneur, you always have to have conviction, which is saying with or without certain, you can't hope or plan on things that may be outside your control, right? Because until some investor says we are in, you still got to have the trajectory that you're on, the path you're on. And I think we've always been passionate, excited about our vision. And obviously, without the funding, you have fewer resources, and it'll take a lot longer, and you have to be, the things that you would do would be different. I think now, so I think we'd have been good either way. Certainly it's much better to do it with funding, because what happens is some of these opportunities, if you can accelerate investments, if you can develop new things, if you can market it better, have more sales, more product and innovation, then it actually accelerates your growth, your business, and so on. So I think we are super excited. It's really critical that that's happened. And it also drives a lot of awareness, a lot of credibility. So it's getting a lot of attention from customers, from partners, from employees that want to join us. And yes, we are hiring and growing a lot. And from you guys, media, right? So I think all of that can. But like I said, it's not that while having your name in the press is nice. I think that's not the objective, right? It doesn't do anything for us. The objective is that it helps give visibility to the business, it helps grow the business, and really, you want to achieve and accomplish the vision that you have, right? So if we continue building value, then the valuation will follow.
Yeah, and I think especially if the funding comes at a unicorn valuation, it definitely helps. And because I mean, let's admit it, we all are sort of unicorn obsessed, investors, startups, the ecosystem, and to a certain extent, media too. I mean, and I've heard this quite a bit from people, but I think there seems to be this ultimate nirvana movement for startups that, wow, I am in the unicorn league right now. I want to ask you, Beerud, that what really are you focusing on right now from a product roadmap strategy? Now that you've raised funding and perhaps close to 2 decades right now to where you have reached, right? In terms of where Gupshup is, and you also dropped the name SMS, so it's only Gupshup, which clearly goes to show that your aspirations are beyond messaging right now.
Right. So I think of a few things. Certainly, I mean, yes, it's a good valuation. I'm not sure I agree with the nirvana moment, like you're saying it, or some of the breathless reporting in the media and so on, because sometimes people assume that valuations can only go one direction, which is up and up, and that's certainly not the case, right? Anybody who's, I mean, I've lived through plenty of sort of entrepreneurial cycles to know that valuations can go up and down, and it depends on you continuing to execute, continuing to grow and scale the business, right? So I think that's the sobering reality of this is with higher valuation, there are raised expectations. There's more pressure. There's more competitive awareness, right? A lot of people are also watching and trying to maybe replicate what we are doing and things like that. So it gets harder. Now, of course, you have more resources, but it also gets harder, gets more challenging and to scale up, right? But in terms of what we are looking to do, or what we are focusing on right now, is to use these resources to, like I said, accelerate our vision. And we have this vision of conversational messaging, right? Meaning the ability for any consumer to chat with businesses as easily as chatting with a friend, right? Through messaging, right? And that messaging could be SMS, but it could be other channels too. It could be WhatsApp. It's could be another channel that we've ourselves launched called GIP, which is just short for Gupshup IP messaging channel. So it could be any one of those channels. And the point is, you can just ask your question and get answered. So instead of calling the call center and staying on hold for a long time, you can really just text and just get your responses, and maybe even buy things, and so on. So we are investing a lot in product and engineering, right, to drive a lot of innovation, to create new products, and so on. We are also investing in sort of sales and marketing, and especially international expansion also. And lastly, we might look at potentially acquiring some product companies in adjacent spaces that may complement our offerings. So yeah, I think you know yeah, it's not just SMS alone. But we are focused on messaging, and that could be, like I said, not just SMS but WhatsApp and IP messaging channels as well, because you can do more richer interactions with these newer channels, right? It's not just sort of one way messaging, but you can have two-way conversations, you can have images and buttons and interactivity. So yeah, we're very excited. And I think the if I can just add one more thing, right? I think if you think about the mid 90s, when the first internet wave happened, when websites came about, think about it, every business had to eventually build a website, because that's the digital storefront. That's where customers look for you, and that's where they expect to find the business. Now and going forward, the conversational experience will be the new digital storefront. You already know, right, with the pandemic, that your local grocery store or the local restaurant is taking orders through WhatsApp, or you can send them a message and then they deliver it to you, right? And if it's 5 or 10 orders a day, you can do it manually. But if it's more than that, you need a system and tool. So anyway, we're building all these tools and systems to enable these sort of conversational experiences. So it's a huge vision, a huge opportunity. I think that's why we got this big funding round, because obviously our investors are betting on the same thesis that this will happen, and they want us to achieve it faster. So that's what we are focused on.
Tell me one thing, that Birud, is WhatsApp a friend to you or an enemy? I mean, it's a frenemy concept. WhatsApp, I think it plays a role of a frenemy in your life. And the way I see it, is it more of an enemy than a friend right now? Just given that, WhatsApp, also WhatsApp for business, especially getting Reliance Geo as an ally in India because of larger Facebook Geo partnership. How do you think does that relationship, and just given the huge reach in India, sort of work out for you?
Oh, you want to get me into trouble, don't you? No, no, no. I think WhatsApp is definitely a friend. It's a partner, right? And let me explain what I mean by that. So WhatsApp has opened up APIs. They've now opened up the ability for businesses to send messages to consumers through WhatsApp, right? So they provide what are called APIs, but businesses need more than that, right? They need some tools and integrations to use this API. And then when the user sends a message, they need to be able to respond to it automatically, and so on. So that so Gupshup is that sort of middle partner that bridges the gap between what WhatsApp provides and what businesses need, right? So we take the WhatsApp platform, and then we integrate it with the Gupshup platform, which adds all of these other capabilities for automated responses and for rich interactions. And then we offer that to the enterprises. So it's actually a very, very symbiotic relationship. Because of the work we do, more businesses use WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is very happy with what we do. And because of WhatsApp, we can actually offer more services to these businesses, right? So previously, I mean, we did the same thing, mind you, for SMSs also, right? We provide the same platform and tools for businesses to send millions of SMSs. Now we also help them send millions of WhatsApp messages. So we are very clearly and certainly, their partner, and not just WhatsApp, but even the mobile operators are partners for us, or other channels like Skype and Telegram and so on, right? So we are sort of that platform in the middle that helps businesses use all these. There are actually 30 plus messaging channels, many different channels. So in a way, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of differences with each of these channels, and we make it all simple. We say, look, the enterprise doesn't have to worry about all of it. We give them a single API. They just give us the message and the phone number that they want to send it to, and we'll make sure that it gets delivered looking the right way through the right channel, and so on. So I think it's working very well.
So, what really are your expansion plans? In terms of how big can this opportunity really become? I mean, are
Oh,
you on the revenue trajectory steadfast? I mean, is that coming along well?
yeah. So like I said, right? I think we really believe, just like every business had to build a website, now every business is going to have to build a conversational experience. That means uh, their consumers are going to try and reach them through their favorite messaging apps and messaging channels, and businesses will have to respond to those queries. Businesses that do that well will gain more customers, and if they don't, they might lose customers, right? And we saw that in the web era too, right? There were, as you know, online e-commerce has really killed a lot of offline businesses that did not adapt, right? I think you're going to see a lot of the same thing happening. And by the way, the pandemic has only accelerated this phenomenon of even offline businesses moving to online to survive and thrive in this new environment. So I think the opportunity is huge, and there's a lot of infrastructure needed and a lot of tools that are needed, right? So there are millions of businesses worldwide, small and large. They will all need this. And and again, to use the web analogy, think about platforms like Shopify that help businesses build good websites, right? In that same way, we help businesses build this. So I think there's a huge opportunity. You asked about revenues. I think we are projecting some very healthy revenue growth, about 40, 50% year over year. And also, as we add more services, more conversational services, and so on, it also sort of drives more value to our customers and also more margins for us as well. So, yeah, I think we are very excited about the potential. It's a huge opportunity worldwide.
I think the way you are right now on your entrepreneurial journey, this looks like that as a next hockey stick growth for you, especially with this funding coming in and what you're trying to do. So, how important is profitability in this conversation? And
Yeah.
the narrative that you're trying to build, does it often come into in boardroom conversations, or there's just no pressure from investors at all?
No, you're right. I think when you think about hockey stick, right? I mean, I've been in this situation. This is the second time, right? Like, by the way, when I started Elance, my first company, which is now called Upwork, I was preaching remote work to the world, right? And when I was doing that, many, didn't believe it, and a lot of people were just openly skeptical. They're like, I would never work with somebody. What if they run away with my money? What if they, I need to see them face to face. I really need to know them, trust them, and on and on, right? And now, 2 decades and a pandemic later, it's conventional wisdom, right? The whole world is doing remote work. So similarly here, right? I was just talking about conversational messaging, and we have this vision and we have a lot of conviction around it. And even today, a lot of people say, no, we'll see, maybe not, and so on. But I think, I mean, I'm confident that a few years from now, we'll look back saying, wait a minute, how did we do business, without sort of these capabilities and so on. So I think it's, that's part and parcel of the entrepreneurial journey, because if it was obvious, everybody would be doing it. And, if everybody's not doing it, then it won't be obvious. And it's up to you to explain how and why it will happen. Um, you asked about profitability. Well, firstly, our company has been profitable because, like you mentioned, it's been 10 years since our last funding round. And there were times where we needed the funding and nobody would give it to us. So the only way to survive was to be profitable. And at this point, unlike many of the other unicorns ever announced, I mean, we are probably one of the few profitable unicorns, right? So if anything, the pressure in our board conversations is, don't invest as much as you can in growth. And if you have to become less profitable for some time, that's okay. But do not sacrifice on growth at all. So I think it's the other kind of pressure, right? And sometimes it may make sense, like I'm saying, right? With this funding that we've received, we are going to invest a lot. And when you invest a lot, right, in the short term, maybe it may reduce our profitability a little bit. But I think because you're looking at profitability 3 years or 5 years out, and sometimes you need to invest now to have much greater profitability then, right? So I think, and our investors are willing to take that long-term bet as well. So yeah, but structurally it's not a problem for us. It's a profitable business and will stay that way.
Yeah. So we have seen this, the periods of supernatural growth and this entire famous blitz scaling approach, adopted by VCs in terms of achieving faster growth as much as you can. My question to you really is that this conversational messaging opportunity, and good that you sort of mentioned Shopify there, what we're seeing right now is this huge future of e-commerce, which is labeled as social commerce. That is the future of e-commerce right now. Amazon is not necessarily been labeled as the future. We are seeing websites like Nisho and what Instagram is doing, creating these influencers. And you created influencers way back, 10 years back when you really began that. So this content to commerce journey is being seen across the board. Now that you have this huge platform with you, which has significant hold with businesses, do you think the natural progression for you could be commerce in near time and future?
Well, in a way, yes, right? So firstly, when I talk about conversational messaging, one important part of that vision is conversational commerce, right? What that means is, imagine, I mean, in the offline world, the way you shop, right? You walk into a store and there's a salesperson, right, who provides you the best service. It's like, okay, what do you want? And, you say, I want this dress, and they'll show you, look, we have this and we have that, and here's something new that's come up. And then you say, oh, do you have it in red, green, or blue? And do you have it in small, medium, large? And then say, okay, well, I get a discount if I buy two of them together, and things like that, right? Now that is a conversation, right? You're having a conversation with the store, and which then leads to a purchase. Right, and it's only when you look at a website or an app, they became very rigid and structured interfaces, right? You kind of visit a screen, go to a tab, press a button, and then something happens, right? But if you have a question, now you kind of, I don't know, you have to look at some details, some of the fine print, or maybe find a phone number. And then if you find the phone number, hopefully they'll pick up the number. If you have a question, maybe not, right? So it's sort of all very convoluted. But imagine if you could now do the same thing just through chat, right? Or you mentioned Instagram. That's another channel that's coming up. It could be WhatsApp. It could be SMS. Could be GIP, like I mentioned earlier, and so on, right? So that whole vision of conversational commerce is indeed a part of exactly what we are talking about. And commerce is important because that's where all the money is, right? That's where consumers are spending, and therefore a lot of startups are spending, and therefore investors are spending, and so on. So certainly enabling conversational commerce is a critical part of what we do.
I also want to sort of ask you, Beerud, and I think then we'll sort of we're close to wrapping up this conversation, that this power of big tech, will everything be built around big tech right now? How monopolistic can they really get? There's so many startups that I speak with. Everything is centered around the attention economy of big tech, or how I can support or build something on the support system of big tech. Is that really the world that we have to live in for the next foreseeable future, and live with the power of big tech for anything that we do, eat, shop, play, pleasure, think, whatever?
You know, well, so see, part of the reason why that happens in the tech industry is that a lot of technology has a winner take all or winner take most kind of phenomenon, right? Meaning, if somebody has built software, right, making a million copies or a billion copies of that software, I mean, it costs no extra money to distribute it to more people, right? So whoever spends more can then offer it to more people at a cheaper price, right? And it's very different. So the uh, economics in the digital or the tech ecosystem are very different from economics in the real world, right? It's the difference between bits and atoms, right? Physical atoms are there's diminishing returns. If a factory becomes too big, then it becomes more complex. In tech, it's the exact opposite. When a software factory, if you will, right, becomes too big, it becomes easier because now they can offer it, cheaper and better product and so on. So that's why you see more consolidation, which means the search company becomes a bigger search company, or a CRM company becomes a bigger CRM company, and so on. So I think, and you're going to see that in many other trends, right? But at the same time, there are newer spaces that are emerging, right? I think sort of software is transforming virtually every industry, right? I mean, so you have a new car company emerging, a new software-based hotel company emerging, a new software-based taxi company emerging, and so on. And everything is sort of software-based, but they're all different businesses. So, and they'll all be bigger than they used to be because, because once you build it, you can distribute it to lots and lots of people. So I think I'm not sure I worry about just the concept of big tech, so long as, of course, you don't want it to be monopolistic. You want there to be competitive dynamics. And so long as there's lots of different players, each of them might be bigger, but there's still many, many different players. And there's never a dull moment in tech, right? I mean, there's new technologies emerging. There's different kinds of shifts happening all the time. So, I mean, IBM, for example, once upon a time used to be huge, and I think they're not as big anymore, and so on. So I think I'm not I'm not that worried now. Of course, the regulators have to continue evaluating and monitoring on an ongoing basis, but I think it also brings. I mean, let's not forget the enormous advantages it brings, to our lives, and they've been transformed in such powerful ways now. So
Okay, Beerud, I would have to ask you this: how sort of close is the public float? Are you sort of contemplating that, and what really is the trajectory, if at all, on that one?
well, firstly, on that question, it's just another one of those things that's not entirely within our control, right? Because a public listing depends on market circumstances and market volatility and investment bankers and public market investors and so on, right? So that's one part. The other part is we've just raised a big round of funding, right? In fact, the private markets have gotten very, very aggressive, where you can get all the capital you need. I mean, if your business is doing well, there's plenty of capital available in the private market. And in some sense, it's a lot easier and simpler, right? I mean, we got this round done. It just happened with very little friction. So,
I
and it
mean, you
allows
don't
us
have to
to.
disclose in public.
What's
Unlike
that?
public, you don't have to disclose so much in private rounds of funding.
Exactly. And you can continue to execute quietly. And by the way, we are also going to create some liquidity for existing employees and so on as well, right? Because sometimes that's another reason to go public, because people want to convert their shares into money because they want to buy a house or a car or whatever it is, right? So we are doing that also through public market transactions and so on. So I think the pressure, the artificial pressure to go public has decreased in a way. But we'll see. I mean, look, like I said, we have enough scale. We are profitable. And if we continue on this trajectory, then I think, maybe in the next few quarters, both we would be ready and willing to go public, and that could happen. But, nothing. Uh, I mean, it's an ongoing discussion, so nothing to announce at the moment. We'll see.
Okay. I think the two things that I'm gathering from this conversation really are for you is that, one has to really focus on things that you can control. Failure can be difficult, but that is the time when you have to hunker down and see what you can do and what is the path forward. And third thing, which I think sort of I'm guessing from this, is that perhaps you have always been ahead of time. on whatever you have thought in the Gupshup journey. And which is why this thinking comes that every growth should be contextual. And perhaps at times, of course, being late is difficult and it can hit you, but being early can hit you as well, big time.
Oh, absolutely. No, I think those three lessons, those three observations are right on. And yeah, I mean, you certainly don't want to be late because then, the opportunity may be gone. But being too early can also be a problem because, I think if you invest too early and prepare all these things and there's nobody to use it, you could run out of cash, right? So I think this is the classic entrepreneurial dilemma of, do you accelerate, do you slow down, right? Do you want to invest ahead of the curve but not so far ahead of the curve that you run out of capital before by the time you get there, and so on. So I think, yeah, it's a challenge. I think, yeah, my friends joke with me that sometimes it's too early, whatever you say it'll happen like 10 years later or something. But so I don't know. I don't know whether it's good to be able to look into the future or not, right? Or anyway, I think, that's a constant discussion. And by the way, the way to solve that problem, if you will, is also keep talking to your customers, right? Meaning, one of the challenges for an entrepreneur is, as they say, you don't drink your own Kool-Aid, or you don't believe, you shouldn't only just believe your own comments either. You have to validate it with real customers saying, oh, I have this great idea, we'll build this thing, but if we built it, would you use it? Or here's a prototype, would you try it? And if you can find real customers who use it, and then you find from one you get 10 and 100 and so on, that's the way to be close enough to the market, right? So you always have to create something new, but don't over engineer it. Quickly test it in the market, and if the market adopts that, then you build the version 2 and version 3 of it. So we keep doing that as well. So I keep myself in check that way. Yeah.
That
My customers keep me in check. Yeah.
I think, and also perhaps I think it's a good idea to be a tortoise and not a hare all the time. I think there is some sort of merit in being that also. So I
Well,
think, yeah.
I mean, a very quick comment, right? I think sometimes you have to run a marathon, sometimes you have to sprint, and just to use that analogy. So I think, yeah, just having different gears is helpful to be able to do both. Yeah.
Okay. So what are you Netflixing these days?
Oh, I wish I had as much time as I wanted to watch, but I mean, I mean, Bridgerton was good. My wife and I, we saw it. It was, very fast paced and a delightful show. And I'm forgetting a few. I think usually it's just whatever my wife's watching is what I catch on.
And Musk or Bezos, the go-to person?
Oh, Musk, I guess.
Okay. And I also wanted to ask you that the most humbling experience of your life till now, Beerud, what would that really be?
Oh, I mean, really, well, two, I should say, my entrepreneurial journey and my kids, you know. But my kids keep me grounded, right? And but the entrepreneurial journey, I mean, especially the near death experiences and the really stressful moments are, they're really humbling, and it can be the most, challenging of times for anyone.
And your favorite book of all time, what would that be?
Oh, I love this book called Grit, 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 by Angela Duckworth, I think. And it talks about how that more than any other attribute, grit is sort of leads to success. And at least my entrepreneurial journey has been, a lot of perseverance and dealing with it. And grit doesn't mean just stubbornly holding on to things. It means, persevering, learning, changing things, innovating, and so on. So anyway, I would strongly recommend that book.
Absolutely, your entrepreneurial journey has been one of grit and perseverance, and one can really, really see why you like that book, Grit. I mean, sort of no sort of surprises there. I think we had a very enjoyable conversation, Beerud. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I think it was very meaningful and useful for our watchers and audiences also. Thank you so much for your time and energy. The time to see you next. Goodbye and good luck.